On a dark kabuki stage, the figure in black was not the assassin. He was the person you were trained to ignore. He could stand beside the hero, move a prop, carry scenery, and vanish in plain sight because the audience accepted the rule. A Kuroko was invisible. Then playwrights found the turn. Let the invisible worker linger one breath too long. Let him step close to a nobleman. Let the audience keep ignoring him. Then let him strike. That is where the famous black-clad ninja begins. Not in a mountain raid, not in a medieval battlefield, but in the viewer's agreement to ignore a stagehand. The outfit that now feels ancient was a visual trick from the 18th century stage, long after the worst wars had passed. If you went back to the violent world of Sengoku Japan, a spy dressed in solid black would not look invisible. Under moonlight, near lanterns, against pale walls, or on a snowy road, that silhouette would announce itself. Guards did not need to understand a secret uniform. They only needed to notice someone who did not look like everyone else. The real shinobi survived by disappearing into ordinary life. They wore the rough clothes of farmers, merchants, laborers, and traveling monks. They moved with tools, bundles, trade goods, or religious objects, items that made them look tired, poor, and forgettable. The safest disguise was not mystery. It was poverty. It was boredom. Once the costume is stripped away, the question changes. If the historical shinobi were not elite shadow warriors in black suits, but people who looked like the lowest workers on the road, then who were they in the eyes of feudal Japan? And why would the proud samurai depend on them? The answer is written in status, labor, and exclusion. Feudal Japanese society was arranged through rigid status categories: samurai, farmers, artisans, and merchants. These were not just occupations. They shaped where a person could live, what they could wear, whom they could marry, and how authorities could treat them. Then came the people respectable society pushed outside the frame. One group was known as Eita, outcasts forced into work involving blood, death, animal carcasses, and execution. Another was known as Hinin, a term often translated as non-humans. These terms must be understood as historical caste labels, not modern identities. In their own time, they marked people who could be segregated, omitted from ordinary registries, denied marriage outside their status, and used for labor that respectable society wanted done, but did not want to touch. This is where the theater image becomes a social trap. The samurai world publicly celebrated honor, rank, and ritual purity. War demanded the opposite, spying on castles, spreading rumors, poisoning supplies, setting fires, disposing of bodies, and moving through the night without formal challenge. The religious and social language around this was kegare, spiritual defilement. Contact with death, blood, filth, and deception could be treated as pollution. For a warrior family concerned with lineage and status, that pollution mattered. Purity could not scout a gate. It could not learn which village might defect, where food was stored, or which enemy commander could be frightened or misled. Battles could be decided before armies ever met. In practice, that produced a brutal arrangement. Work condemned as impure was handed to people already labeled impure. Outcasts could be hired as scouts, arsonists, informants, saboteurs, and night agents. The samurai could use the results while keeping the stain away from their own public identity. The people remembered as shinobi were not living inside a secret code of glamour. Many were trapped inside a system that despised them, then relied on them. Their value came from the very exclusion that made their lives disposable. Once that is understood, the next mystery becomes practical. How does a person with no samurai status, no right to carry noble weapons, and no protection from the law survive inside enemy territory? The surviving manuals are colder than the legend. Texts such as the Bansenshukai and the Shoninki do not read like manuals for glorious duels. Open them looking for secret battlefield swordplay, and the emphasis falls on disguise, route planning, weather, concealment, rumor, psychology, and escape. The useful shinobi was not the guard killer in the courtyard. He was the one who learned the courtyard's layout, left without being noticed, and delivered the information before it went stale. The Bansenshukai explicitly stresses running away and avoiding combat. In that world, a fight did not prove skill. It meant the mission had gone wrong, A dead spy could not report what he had seen. That same logic shaped what they carried. Popular fiction gives the ninja sleek weapons and dramatic blades. Historical reality points back to the road, the field, and the checkpoint. A low-status traveler with a samurai sword could be exposed at once. A peasant with a tool drew less attention. The kunai, now often imagined as a throwing dagger, was rooted in the form of a heavy iron trowel. It could dig, pry boards loose, scrape, wedge, climb, or open a path without looking like a noble weapon. The kusarigama, a sickle with a weighted chain, began from the world of harvesting and clearing brush. Ordinary objects could become ladders, hooks, fire-starting kits, or containers for messages. The test was practical. An object that made the carrier look special put him at risk. One that made him look poor, tired, and ordinary could keep him alive. The manuals reveal a discipline built around not being worth a second glance, a monk asking for shelter, a merchant counting goods, a laborer carrying iron, a farmer walking a muddy road after rain. The real shinobi method was survival under suspicion. From there, the question turns to the mountain regions later generations would imagine as ninja strongholds. The map tightens the trap. Iga was a basin surrounded by rugged mountains. Any army entering it had to pass through narrow roads, steep ridges, forest paths, and villages where local defenders knew every ditch and escape route. Later legend turned places like Iga and Koka into mysterious training grounds for secret assassin clans. The older reality was political, local, and dangerous to the feudal order. Iga was a self-governing peasant collective, associated with the Iga Sokoku Ikki. Local farmers and low-ranking gentry managed defense, resisted outside taxation, and made decisions through local councils. In a Japan dominated by warlords, that independence challenged the assumption that peasants existed to obey. To Oda Nobunaga, the rising power working to unify Japan by force, Iga was more than a mountain nuisance. It stood as a visible disorder. If a peasant community could fortify itself, repel authority, and govern from behind mountain walls, then lordly control was not natural. It had to be imposed. An earlier invasion by Nobunaga's son was repelled by eager defenders using guerrilla tactics. The defeat embarrassed the regime and proved that local knowledge could break a stronger army when the terrain favored the defenders. Nobunaga answered with scale. In 1581, during the Tensho-Iga War, he sent more than 40,000 troops into the province. The mountain passes were sealed. Forces advanced from multiple directions. The same geography that had protected Iga became a trap. Villages that had supplied defenders became targets. Forest paths that had allowed ambushes became routes of flight. Families were pushed towards soldiers instead of away from them. The Iga Gunki, the chronicle of the war, describes a campaign of devastation, crops burned, temples destroyed, and civilians killed. Accounts speak of more than 10,000 men, women, and children massacred. The peasant republic was broken, survivors scattered, landless and vulnerable. To live, they carried with them the skills their mountains had demanded: scouting, evasion, sabotage, infiltration, and intelligence gathering. Here the history turns bitter. Skills developed to resist samurai domination became services sold to samurai employers. The ninja legend did not rise from a noble assassin guild. It rose from communities crushed by power, then forced to sell survival itself. After a tragedy like that, the next transformation is almost harder to look at: how memory became colorful, magical, and profitable. Peace finished what war began. By the early 17th century, the great wars of the Sengoku period had ended. The Tokugawa shogunate imposed a long, rigid stability. Castles became administrative centers. Samurai who once built identity around war now handled documents, stipends, and order. In cities like Edo, a literate urban public grew around theater, prints, popular fiction, scandal, and tales of a violent past they had never lived through. The marketplace rewarded figures that could be recognized from the back row and repeated in a single image. The shinobi offered perfect raw material: stealth, mountain warfare, secret missions, betrayal, and escape. The historical reality was harder to sell. Despised outcasts performing polluted labor for masters who needed them but looked down on them, did not make a clean heroic fantasy. It pointed back to caste violence and exploitation. Entertainment reshaped the figure until audiences could use him. Writers and theater artists gave Shinobi magical powers. They could vanish in smoke, shapeshift, summon beasts, pass through walls, or perform mystical signs. Rough tools became stylized weapons. Poverty became discipline. Exclusion became mystery. Forced survival became chosen heroism. The Kuroko stage costume gave the myth a body. Woodblock prints gave it a pose. Popular stories gave it moral distance from the people who had actually suffered. Even official respectability helped soften the memory. Descendants from Iga could be absorbed into controlled service roles, including palace guard functions under the shogunate. That kind of employment did more than preserve the old story, it domesticated it, turning dangerous memories of independent mountain communities and exploited outcasts into a safer tale of loyalty and order. By the time the image traveled beyond Japan, much of the original pain had been stripped away. What remained was marketable: the black suit, the silent weapon, the mystical assassin, the thrilling silhouette. The remaining question is not whether the myth entertains, it is what had to be removed before the entertainment could begin. In the end, the evidence speaks more quietly than the legend. A rusted tool, a caste registry, a mountain road, a burned village recorded in a war chronicle, a theatre print where a black-clad stagehand becomes something audiences could mistake for history. The noble assassin is easier to admire than the outcast laborer. The perfect costume stays in memory more easily than the people who had to look poor, ordinary, and invisible in order to survive. That is the cost of the ninja myth. Systemic exclusion becomes style. Desperate work becomes glamour. The samurai order the dirty work, condemn the people who perform it, and then vanish behind a cleaner legend. When the shinobi are shown as flawless shadow warriors, ask what suffering has been removed from the frame. When the black costume appears, remember the stagehand. When the heroic code appears, remember the people who had no honorable place in the code at all. Remembering the real shinobi does not strip them of skill. It puts that skill back where it came from, among human beings navigating the darkest corners of a society that despised them, not for glory, not for legend, but to stay alive.